I should probably start with a warning. What I'm about to tell you isn't pretty or simple or neat. It's not the kind of story you wrap in a bow at the end and call it closure. It's messy and uncomfortable, and at times deeply wrong. It's about a woman who forgot how to be seen, a young man who didn't know where to put his pain, and a house filled with silence that was anything but empty. It's about me. For a long time, I told myself I was fine. That word became my favorite shield. How are you, Lena? I'm fine. Are you coping okay? I'm fine. The truth was I hadn't been fine in years, but saying it out loud felt like admitting defeat, and I had spent most of my life pretending. I knew what I was doing. I was 39 when my marriage finally crumbled for good, but if I'm honest, it had been dying a slow, quiet death years before that. Mark and I used to be the couple that people pointed to and said they're solid. You know the type. The ones who look good in Christmas photos and never raise their voices in public, the ones who seem safe. But nothing real ever dies all at once. It rots in corners you don't look at. It thins out in small, invisible ways. First it was missed calls and late nights at the office. Then it was half-finished conversations and I'm too tired and we'll talk later. Later never came. I remember sitting across from him at the dinner table one night wearing a dress I'd bought on impulse because I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd notice. I'd curled my hair, put on lipstick I hadn't worn in years. The chicken was still steaming on our plates. I'd made his favorite, even though I didn't particularly like it. He didn't look up once. He scrolled through his phone, laughed at something on the screen, took a few bites, and excused himself early. No compliment, no question, no glance. It was like I'd become furniture. Useful, but easy to ignore. You can only be invisible for so long before you start wondering if you're really there at all. When he finally left, suitcases packed in the back of his car, eyes full of guilt, but not enough to stay, I didn't cry. People always expect that part. They expect tears and begging and dramatic door slamming. But when the door clicked shut behind him, I just stood there in the hallway, staring at the space he used to fill. It felt like standing in a house after a storm had passed. The damage was already done. There was nothing left to watch fall apart. Our son Caleb left for college the same year. He was my baby, even at 19. Tall, lanky, always a little awkward when someone hugged him too long. I'd poured my entire life into him, the school meetings, the late night fevers, the lunches packed in the dark before work. When he drove off with his car overloaded with boxes and the cheap toaster we bought on sale, I smiled and waved and said all the right things. I'm so proud of you. You're going to do great. Call me when you get there. When he turned the corner and disappeared, the silence that followed swallowed the house whole. No door slamming, no footsteps running down the stairs. No, Mom, have you seen my hoodie? Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the phantom echo of a life that had just moved on without me. For the first time in years, nobody needed me. You would think that might feel freeing, a chance to rediscover myself, to breathe, to travel, to do all the things magazines tell women to do after divorce. Yoga retreats, solo vacations, wine with friends, reinvention. Instead, it felt like standing on a stage after the audience had gone home. The lights were still hot on my skin, but there was no one left to watch. I stumbled through that first year alone. Work, home, sleep, repeat. There was comfort in routine, even if it felt like autopilot. I told myself this was normal. I was adjusting. Healing takes time. That's what people say, right? Then Noah came, and everything that was barely holding together started to come undone. Noah was 22, tall, with that constantly rumpled look that made him seem like he'd just woken up from a nap he didn't remember taking. Dark hair, careless stubble, eyes that looked older than they should have. He'd grown up 2 streets over, one of those kids who had practically lived in our house during his middle school years. He and Caleb used to spend entire summers tracking mud through my kitchen and leaving empty soda cans everywhere. Back then he'd been all elbows and noise, a blur of energy and bad jokes. I used to hand him snacks and say things like, "Shoes off at the door, please," and he'd grin and call me Lena instead of Mrs. Kingsley like the other kids did. I hadn't seen him in years. Life got busy, kids grow up, you lose track. Then one rainy afternoon, there was a knock on my door, and when I opened it, there he was. Taller, broader, older, but with the same hesitant half smile. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck like he was embarrassed to be there. "Sorry to just show up." There was a duffel bag at his feet. His hoodie was soaked at the shoulders. He looked exhausted. "Of course," I said, stepping aside without even asking why he'd come. That maternal reflex never really leaves you. "Come in, you're dripping." He told me the story over. Mug of coffee at the kitchen table, dropped out of college, couldn't afford rent, his job at the hardware store wasn't enough. His mom's new place was a studio apartment with barely enough room for herself and the twins. He'd tried couch surfing, but that wore out quicker than he expected. "I just need somewhere to land for a bit." he said, eyes fixed on a crack in the table. I'll pay what I can. I don't expect you to just, let me stay for free. The sensible part of me hesitated. Renting a room to a 22-year-old friend of my son's? It sounded like a bad idea wrapped in a good excuse. But there was something about the way he sat. Shoulders slumped, fingers clenched around the coffee mug like it was the only warm thing he had left, that made it impossible to say no. You can take Caleb's room, I heard myself say, at least until you figure things out. Noah's shoulders loosened. He looked up, eyes bright with relief. Thank you, Lena. Really, I promise I won't be a problem. I believed him. I shouldn't have. At first, it was easy. He stayed out of the way, woke up early for work. I felt it before I saw it. The sense of being watched. Not in a paranoid way, not like danger. More like warmth on the back of your neck when you step into the sun. I turned my head just slightly, and there he was in the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms folded loosely, watching me. He didn't look away. He could have. That's what people usually do when they're caught staring. They pretend they were looking at the wall behind you or the clock on the far side of the room. He didn't. His gaze met mine and stayed there, steady and unflinching, like he wanted me to know he'd been looking. Something fluttered under my ribs, a tight, unwelcome pull. I smiled because that's what I've been trained to do. Hungry? I asked, turning back to the stove too quickly. There's plenty. Yeah, he said, and I could hear the shift in his voice, something lower, softer. Smells good. I told myself I was imagining it, but once you notice something, you can't unnotice it. It's like buying a red car and suddenly seeing red cars everywhere. The next few weeks were full of those tiny, charged moments. I'd be reading on the couch, pretending to be more interested in the book than I actually was, and I'd feel his gaze from the armchair across the room. I'd glance up, and he'd be looking at me over the edge of his phone, like he'd forgotten to hide it. I'd pass him in the hallway, squeezed between framed family photos and scuffed paint, and the brush of shoulders would feel intentional. His sorry would linger a fraction of a second too long in the air between us. It would have been so easy to shut it down. A single sharp comment, a clear boundary. But I didn't, because somewhere under the confusion, under the shame, under the awareness that this was not how I was supposed to be experienced by a young man who used to eat pizza at my kitchen table with my son, there was something else. There was the dizzy, unfamiliar feeling of being seen again. No one had looked at me like that in years. Not Mark, not strangers, not anyone. I had become a background character in my own life. The person who made things happen for other people, who smoothed edges and filled gaps and wiped crumbs off the table. Useful, necessary even, but not desired. I hate that word, desire. It makes it sound glamorous, like a movie. In reality, it felt more like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you're too close, but leaning forward anyway just to see how far you can look without falling. One night, the back door lock jammed. It was late, and the neighborhood was quiet. I realized the door wasn't closing properly, and the old anxiety kicked in. Single woman, alone in a creaky house, door that doesn't quite latch. I muttered to myself, grabbed a screwdriver from the junk drawer, and knelt to fiddle with the screws. I didn't hear Noah come in behind me. One moment it was just me, the door, and the faint hum of the kitchen light. The next moment there was the sense of someone else, close, too close. Need a hand? He asked, his voice right above me. I startled and almost dropped the screwdriver. Oh, I didn't hear you. It's just the latch. It keeps catching. He stepped in, and just like that, he was right behind me. I could feel the heat of his body, the faint brush of his knee against my shoulder as he crouched down. His hand slid over mine to take the screwdriver, and my skin reacted before my brain did. A small spark, a static shock. I should have pulled away. I didn't move. He didn't either. Here, he said quietly, his fingers wrapped around the same piece of metal I was holding. Let me. For a moment too long, it was just our hands, our shared grip, the silence humming in the tiny space between skin and air. Then he gently slid the screwdriver from my fingers and leaned closer to examine the lock. I watched the side of his face, the soft concentration in his brow, the way his lashes cast faint shadows on his cheeks in the harsh kitchen light. I noticed things I had no business noticing. There, he said after a minute. He wiggled the handle and the latch clicked satisfying into place. Just needed tightening. He glanced at me, and for a split second, our faces were too close. His eyes dipped from mine to my mouth, barely, just a flicker, and then back again. You can imagine the rest. My mind supplied all the paths that moment could have taken, all the ways it could have flipped into something else, into something we couldn't walk back from. Instead, he stood up and stepped back. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Thanks, I murmured, standing up slowly. My knees ached. I felt older than I wanted to. No problem, he said, but his voice sounded rough, different any time. When he walked away, I leaned against the counter, my heart pounding in my throat. I knew something had shifted. There's a particular kind of tension that settles over a home when two people are circling something they're both pretending not to see. It's in the way conversations stall mid-sentence in the sudden interest in unimportant tasks, the rinsing of perfectly clean dishes, the straightening of already straightened cushions. We lived in that tension for weeks. I told myself stories to feel better about it. He's just confused, I thought. He's young, lost, projecting his feelings onto the closest safe person he has. It's not about you, Lena. You're just convenient. That was somehow easier to believe than the alternative, that after years of being invisible, someone might actually be looking at me. And here's the part I hate admitting. I didn't want him to stop. I should have. Every rule, every bit of common sense, every maternal instinct, every layer of this is inappropriate should have screamed loud, enough to drown everything else out. Instead, it whispered, he's an adult, you're an adult, he's not your son, you're just lonely, no one has to know, you haven't done anything wrong yet. Yet is a dangerous word. It all came to a head one night when the storm rolled in. The sky had been threatening all afternoon, heavy swollen clouds sagging low over the neighborhood. By the time the sun set, the rain had turned to a steady drum on the roof, the occasional growl of thunder rolling distantly. I was in the living room, pretending to watch some show I'd already seen. The glow from the TV washed the room in flickering colors. I wasn't paying attention. My mind kept circling the same exhausting loops. Mark, the divorce, Caleb's last text from 3 weeks ago that just said, busy, love you, and the constant awareness of the footsteps upstairs that meant I wasn't alone. I heard him before I saw him, the creak of the third stair, the soft thud of his bare feet on the hardwood, the pause in the hallway. I didn't look up. If I didn't look, maybe this would just be a normal night. Maybe the air wouldn't shift. Maybe he'd just grab a drink from the kitchen and go back up. Lena, he said quietly, not Mrs. Kingsley, not hey, just my name, soft and uncertain. I swallowed. Yeah. I kept my eyes on the TV. Can I sit? It was such a ridiculous question. Of course he could sit. It was a couch, not a throne. Sure, I said, my voice steady, my pulse anything but. He sat down at the opposite end of the couch first, leaving a polite amount of space between us. We watched the screen in silence. Some character was crying. Someone was shouting. I couldn't have explained a single thing that was happening. After a while, he shifted, turning his body slightly toward me. I felt the movement more than I saw it. You've been quiet lately, he said. I let out a humorless breath. But that's rich coming from you. He gave a small, shy laugh. Fair, I don't know, I feel like something's wrong. I hate pretending I don't notice. I finally looked at him. He looked older in that moment, not because of wrinkles or gray hair, he had neither, but because of the weight in his eyes, the way he carried worry like someone years ahead of him. What do you think is wrong, I asked. He hesitated, jaw tightening, his fingers flexed against his knees. I don't know how to say it without sounding messed up, he said. I should have stopped him there. You don't have to say anything. We're fine. Let's not do this. Instead, I whispered, then say it badly. He took a breath, let it out slowly. I think about you all the time, he said, like the words were being dragged out of him. I wish I could say that was the moment I handled everything gracefully, that I calmly set boundaries, helped him find a new place to stay, encouraged him to get therapy and focused on rebuilding my own life. I wish I could say I did all the right, noble, responsible things. I didn't. I stalled. I avoided. I convinced myself that if I just did nothing, if I just existed quietly, the tension would burn itself out. He'd meet someone his own age. I'd eventually stop replaying every charged second in my head. We'd settle back into some version of normal, but suppressed tension doesn't dissolve. It leaks. It shows up in other places, with other people. People noticed. My ex, Mark, stopped by one afternoon to pick up a box of his old vinyl records he'd somehow decided he wanted back after all this time. He stood in the doorway with that same half-regretful smile he'd worn the day he left, like he wasn't sure if he had the right to be in this house anymore. This place looks the same, he said, glancing around the living room. Yeah, I answered, not much has changed. That was a lie, and we both knew it, but he didn't push. He asked about Caleb. I asked about his new apartment. We performed politeness like a well-rehearsed play, hitting the beats without really being present in it. At one point, his eyes flicked toward the stairs where Noah's footsteps had just retreated a minute earlier. Is someone else here? He asked, casual. A boarder, I said, just renting the room, temporary. He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening just enough for me to notice. You always were better at helping people than you were at helping yourself, he said. It wasn't meant as an insult, but it landed like one. Later, my friend Jasmine came over with a bottle of wine, and that look on her face that meant she knew more than I wanted her to. You've been weird, she said, flopping onto the couch like she owned it. And when you get weird, something's up. I've just been busy, I said, defaulting to my favorite lie. Busy brooding, maybe? She narrowed her eyes at me. Lena, you're my friend. I know your I'm fine voice, and this, she waved her hand at me, this is not fine. I stared at my glass, watching the light refract through the red liquid. There's someone in the house, I said, before I could stop myself. Jasmine raised a brow. Other than the paying tenant you told me about? I swallowed. Same person. Silence. Oh, she said, letting the word stretch. She set her glass down and leaned in. How young is young? He's 22, I said quickly. He's not a kid. That is not the defense you think it is, she muttered, but there was no judgment in her tone, just concern. Have you... No, I cut in sharply. We haven't. Nothing has happened. It's just... I trailed off, searching for a word that didn't sound like an accusation against myself. Complicated? She offered. Wrong, I said softly. Her expression softened. Do you like him? She asked. I considered the question carefully. I like that he makes the house feel alive, I said. I like that he looks at me like I'm not just some empty space filling other people's needs. I like that he talks to me like I'm a person, not a function. But do you like him? She pressed. For him, not for what he fills in you? I opened my mouth, closed it. I didn't know the answer. She sighed and reached for my hand. You're allowed to want things, Lena, she said. You're allowed to feel, but you're also allowed to say no to things that will blow up your life and his. I already let it go too far, I whispered. Then stop it before it goes further. The simplicity of that sentence hit me harder than any lecture could have. Stop it. Like I hadn't thought of that. Like I wasn't terrified of what stopping it would actually mean. It came to a breaking point on a night I remember in fragments. The glow of the streetlight outside my window, the faint ticking of the clock on the bedside table, the way the shadows of tree branches moved like fingers across the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the cracks in the paint, replaying every conversation, every look, every moment I'd chosen silence over honesty. My mind twisted itself into knots. Eventually the knots turned into something sharper, more dangerous. A thought. What if I just let myself be selfish once? I hated that thought. It made my stomach churn. It also wouldn't leave. At some point, I must have drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, because the next thing I registered was the soft creak of my bedroom door. My eyes snapped open. There was a silhouette in the doorway, broad shoulders, familiar stillness. Noah? My voice came out rough, tangled in sleep and fear. He stepped inside, slow, hesitant. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I wasn't going to come in. I heard you moving around earlier, and I thought maybe you were... I don't know. I just needed to know you were okay. Something in my chest ached at that. At the idea that he might be the one worrying about me, checking in on me when I was supposed to be the one with the answers. I'm fine, I lied again, sitting up and pulling the blanket closer. Just couldn't sleep. He hovered near the door, hands shoved into the pockets of his sweatpants like he was trying to hold himself together. Me neither, he said. My head won't shut up. We sat in the dim light filtering through the curtains, the air between us heavy. I should go, he said after a moment. I didn't mean to intrude. He turned like he was going to leave, and before I could stop myself, I said, You're not intruding. He froze. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I did. Maybe I wanted him to stay more than I wanted to admit. Maybe I wanted one more moment of feeling like I wasn't drifting alone in the dark. He looked back at me, eyes searching my face. Whatever is happening, it's messing with me, he confessed. I keep being afraid I'll do something that makes you hate me. I could never hate you, I answered automatically. He took a hesitant step closer. Not even if I make it harder for you, he asked. My heart hammered. You already have, I said softly, but not in the way you think. He stopped at the end of the bed, not touching, not leaning in, just standing there like he was waiting for a verdict. I want to be better than this, he said. For you, for me. So be better, I whispered, mostly to myself. We held each other's gaze for what felt like an eternity. The dangerous part of me, the one that was starved of touch and validation and desire, wanted him to take one more step. Wanted to see what would happen if I stopped being the responsible one for once in my life.